Hosted a company reunion for my dad, and some other things that I've collected from division reunions that we attended. But lots and lots of pictures, but mostly about that particular company. I may be repeating. How many of you were here at the very first session when we opened? Is anyone? Not quite a half there. Okay. So I'll know some of the things I'll say I kind of covered with the people at the opening session. So excuse me if I do. Anyway, my father was had been an enlisted man in the peacetime army. We say he went in 1930. He had a year of high school, and I think he actually had the year of high school the second time, to be honest with you. And he was a I think he was pretty much maybe an 18-year-old freshman in high school. That's the way things were back then. That's a little high school in northeast Mississippi called Tishomingo County High School. He ran track and actually was a rather good pilot as far as the state was concerned. The more I researched that, he was kind of overage for the division anyway, too. So anyway, he went into the service, was stationed at Fort Benning, and was in tanks for a while, and then was also in the field artillery. I don't think he was actually in an infantry unit over there. But he had great memories of that, did a lot of athletics, took care of the colonels, or I guess the captain. That was pretty high in those days, captain's horse and some other things. So he got out of the service in 37, when my grandfather died. My dad was the youngest of three sons, and the other two boys were already doing something, so he was sort of designated to come back and take care of his mother, and she was living there on the farm. So he did that and brought back a 17-year-old bride from that he had met while stationed at Fort Benning. My mother had finished 1 year, our junior year of high school, and they married. He met her outside of Columbus, actually in Alabama, Ozark, Alabama. So they came back, and she started her life in Mississippi, and seems like a native there. She still lives. She's 92, still active, fortunately, can still drive and goes to town and visits the old folks in the nursing home. I talked to her yesterday and told her about the election process and the fact that we were coming to Columbus next year. And if her health holds up, I think she'll come over. She hasn't been in other reunions with us, not any of the legacy groups, but she and I have been to several division reunions before we stopped that. So again, hurrying along, I've not heard a lot of it, but anyway, so he comes back. I'm born the next year, and this has been 2038, so 39, 41 Pearl Harbor attack. He's restless. The younger boys are going off, being called off, and I'm thinking about, it'd been 42, toward the end of 42, he told Mother that he wasn't going to let all these young guys come back and tell him what the war was like. So he volunteered to go in, and went down to Camp Shelby. That's one of the induction centers in Mississippi. Stayed there a couple of weeks, and then was put on a train, didn't know exactly where he was going, and went over to Jackson, Mississippi, and then north on the railroad, on the IC railroad, to a little place called Camp Shelby. Camp McCain. And he said he was coming up the railroad tracks, and they saw these tar paper shacks out across to the right as they were going. And he said he knew that's what it was because he had read in the paper that about 3 or 4 months earlier that they were going to build a camp near Grenada, Mississippi, and so that must be the place. So it was. So he started training with the division that was being formed. Because he had some previous experience, he was made a corporal right away, and then became a sergeant in the headquarters company. Headquarters for battalion. And very quickly, so you'll know these terms, the The division consisted of 3 regiments, which you've heard some numbers around here today, the 345th, 46th, and 347. Okay? Within each of these regiments, there were 3 battalions of infantry companies, and in each battalion, there were 4 companies, 3 of which were rifle companies, and the 4th a heavy weapons company, consisting of the heavier mortars and the air water-cooled machine guns. So that was a battalion. But each of these battalions needed some command and control, so that's what the headquarters company was for each of these battalions. And so within a little more detail, within the headquarters company, there were a lot of things to control. You obviously had to have communications down to your companies when they were deployed. You had to have ammunition and Pioneer, it was called, A&P platoon. They were kind of a low-key engineer. The Pioneers, they could dig around. And it turns out, I think, actually when you got into combat, that they did more mine-sweeping type things than anything else. And the 3rd major platoon was the anti-tank platoon that I think the guys trained with old World War I anti-tank weapons that were, what were they? 37 millimeter. And then later on, they got the newer 57 millimeters, which it turns out once they got to Germany, were totally ineffective against the armor of the German tanks. You could disable one if you were able to get a tread, or lucky enough to shoot one in the back of the engine, but unfortunately most of the tanks were not backing up, they were pointing their guns at it. So eventually those 57 millimeters were turned in, and those people in that platoon were portioned out to do different things. Again, a lot of minesweeping. So that's kind of my background. So I was 4 and 5 at the time that we were going through training. My mom and I, after you guys, those of you that did, were able to move on to Columbus, Columbia, South Carolina, for the final training there. There was a period in which a lot of the married couples, were able to find a house to stay there and being able to spend some time with the husbands. And that's what Mom and I did until I had to go back around September or whenever to start my first year of school. So where am I going with this? Okay, so I've got a wealth of information because my dad being older, being in his 30s, around 33, was pretty much a father to some of the younger guys in his outfit. One of which I mentioned, I think, last night, DJ Fitzgibbon, who you see with his daughters out here. They were very close. And as I said, actually, Fitzgibbon would take care of me. He always says babysitting, and that's what it was, I guess. And he said, why your father was doing some other things. And one little bit, because he was older, and Mother is very good, has always been very good at keeping records and doing things. After the war, he had all the addresses of the people in his platoon, basically, all the wire section, the radio section. And so they began exchanging Christmas cards and kept up good correspondence over the years. And would always, some guys would come to visit sometimes, things like that. So when we attended 2 division reunions before Dad got unable to travel. We went to one in Cincinnati in about 1980, something, 83 or something like that. And then 2 years later, the division reunion was in Nashville, Tennessee. And so that was close by, so we attended that. But after that, he wasn't able to travel, at least conveniently, so we decided to have mini reunions ourselves. So we invited people to come to where my wife and I live in Huntsville, Alabama. We started out with 12 of the men from his outfit came that year. But there were 2 that were outside the company. One was the company clerk, who was very ambitious to try to build us out to a company instead of a platoon reunion. And so it grew, and we continued to do that on a yearly basis. So I've been accumulating stuff over the years. It took me a long time to finally figure out exactly what was in a battalion as far as what did a headquarters company make, what was it made up of. And very similar to what the Boston has done in the sense that I was able to identify most of the men in that headquarters company over the years. And of course, when we started this back in 1989. Many of them were still alive. Now, but let's get on to your. So in preparation for this, I had read Lester Atwell's book, Private, when I got it from him at one of the reunions. He attended a couple, I think. And one of the last ones I bought, it's actually autographed by him. And I read through, but I thought I needed to do a refresher course. So I've been reading this over the last couple of months to see what he thought combat was like. And okay, so how many of you how many have read the book? You may be aware. Not a lot, but some. And Harry actually knows the man. Again, it's a book from the standpoint of the enlisted man. In his case, he was a rifleman, but was moved because of his age. He was similar to my dad. He was in his 30s when he went in also. He was single. I'm not sure, can't remember whether he was drafted or volunteered. He was actually a writer. He already had articles published in the Saturday Evening Post. A New Yorker, quintessent New Yorker, always dressed sharply and just. That man wrote some for the New Yorker, I think. But anyway, good on him. But during the SAR, right after the SAR, he was moved back to a less dangerous, an area where he could, take care of himself better. And he was assigned to a battalion surgeon in the battalion medical office, okay? And his job initially was to guard or to receive the weapons from the soldiers when they'd come in for treatment, to check a wound or do whatever. According to the Geneva Convention at that time, there were not supposed to be any weapons in the medical area. But, none of the other battalions were doing it, but apparently this doctor insisted on that regulation. So, Lester was assigned the job of, he was a rifle person, so he could take the weapons. So he'd check them in. He was like a hat check girl, He'd come in and take the weapons and then get treated, he'd give them the weapons and go. And did that a long time. But he saw what things were like. Occasionally somebody would come back from his company that he had originally been in. They'd tell him what it was really like, right there in the foxholes on the front. And so he wrote an account of his experience, first-hand experience, though the names were changed to protect the innocent. And I understand that originally he actually used people's names, but when the editors first looked at it, they said, that won't fly. But all he did, we do know, and I don't know if any of you men knew him in the war, but he was in the 2nd Battalion of the 345th. And in the book, he refers as if he were in the 1st Battalion, and I don't forget what number he uses for a regiment, but the fact was he was in the 2nd Battalion, and I'm not sure, I can't tell in the book what company he was in, but I think Mitch Cady knew, and there's some article in the GANs that I'm going to look back and find out. But here's the thing that impressed me again. What he dealt with were a lot more cases of whatever we want to call it, battlefield fatigue, just scared to death and couldn't cut it, and different things. He saw a lot more cases of that than probably happened to you fellows, and didn't see as much of it. I'm sure some of you saw cases where people got so nervous they couldn't perform. Most of that was probably, hopefully, a lot of it was weeded out in that combat down in the SAR. If a person couldn't take it there, then you kind of learn. But of course, it went on later. So there's a lot of stuff in there that's real. It doesn't sound like the Army was, that there were just a lot of cowards and people that were so nervous if you based everything on that. But it's not totally that. But that's a side that was real, I'm sure, and you may see that. But then also he knew what was going on combat-wise. Plus, he had been, during the SAR, he had been on the front. He had been in the rifle platoon. He knew what shrapnel was from, he knew what an 88 would sound like and what artillery would sound like if it were going out. So I'd say, you younger people, if you want to learn a little bit more about World War I from an enlisted man standpoint.
About World War II.
World War II, get a copy of So, it's called Private. It's called Private. I think it'll be an Amazon.com thing. Oh, no, it's been out since '70s.
You want to mention about World War One? There's a book called The Bible, all that by Graves. It's a great book about World War One.
Okay. What's the name of it again, Brett?
The Bible, all that.
Goodbye to all that.
Hey Jim, wasn't Lester Atwell's nephew selling the books for a while? He's like from
Yeah.
Pennsylvania Writing or something?
Yeah.
He was selling it for a while.
Yeah. The last time I checked, that may be a source. I would assume there's still something. But he had a nephew who brought him to a couple of the conventions that I attended, or reunions that I attended. But it just a delightful. He was blind the last several years of his life, and the nephew would take care of him. But that's one of the first questions that I want to ask. Again, the other thing was that a lot of the people self-inflicted wounds themselves to get off the front. Okay? The most common thing was to shoot themselves in the foot with a weapon. And sometimes it would sure occur accidentally, but sometimes it didn't. And that was not exactly inflicted. It's not $1 million wound. But even though it gets you out of the combat. So I want to solicit comments about what, and you can be honest, how close were you to saying, I got to get out of here? And another thing, now that's not saying that everybody that got nervous and just couldn't take it for a while, were ineffective. A lot of times, after you were sent back and had a couple of days rest or something and got things together, then that would work. But I will give some comment. Maurice, what do you?
Well, I was just going to say that if someone shot themselves in the foot, the other guy that was there, you had to sign a paper saying that it was accidental.
Was that right?
Yeah, I had to sign one of those. That the guy did it accidentally, but I don't know. How do you know?
I know, and if if it was a good, well, anyway, yeah.
The other thing I wanted to just mention is that we were in combat for quite a while, and near the end of the combat, I was so tired, I was hoping someone would shoot me so I would get some rest. We were exhausted.
Well, it's mentioned several times in the book about, people say that they're so tired and just so fatigued that, I'd just as soon be dead. And I'm sure that led to a lot of cases of heroism sometimes.
I had a fellow next to me in the Sahara, and he shot himself in the foot. Unfortunately, he said, I'll shoot for him. So you know where he is.
And in that case, sound traveled faster than the bullet. Mel, did you want to comment on that?
I'm not sure.
We had a terrible day with children among the losses, and it was wet and rainy and awful, and I said, I've had enough, I want to go home. So I decided I would get trench foot. So I was sitting under a tree, I took my shoes and socks off, and I said, okay, feet, get trench foot. I sat there for about 4 minutes, my feet got cold and wet, and I said, I can't do this. So I reached into my helmet, took out the dry socks, and said, I'm here for the future, and I'm not going any place. So I tried for a minute or two, it didn't work.
That's a real honest admission, not a joke.
No,
I appreciate that.
He would never joke.
Any other thoughts along those lines that you'd like to share? Let me get one more from Mark.
Well, I did see a person in the first days down the Sahara under combat. I think the second day he was trembling. He couldn't stop shaking. He was just shaking all over. So
He had to go back.
he went back.
Yes. Ben?
Yes.
Either way.
Okay, I'm Glenn Wilson. I was a field artillery lieutenant to begin with, and, well, as a private. But I was in of course, in this division, and was in the 334th Field Artillery Battalion, and in Battery C was and I was right after the captain, and I spent about a third of my time as a forward observer. We rotated, so that it didn't start that way, but we ended up doing that so that we all had a chance to get killed. But anyhow, I had no problem in combat. Lost a lot of friends, and I could tell you stories there. But at the end, by the end of the war, when I was a captain, I had been very tough-headed about people who were nervous, because I thought, who isn't nervous? But get in there and do it and don't stop. Well, I said that kind of like Patton did. I didn't know how to cuss, so it was pretty clean. But I was a little Methodist boy that wandered out and got in service. But after I left at the end of the war, first thing I tried to become a permanent member. I was transferred to the 5th Division up at Camp Campbell, and the Brigadier General who was in charge of field artillery.
Oh, is there any more on this topic though? About the nervous thing?
Oh, I wanted, I'm just,
Are you getting
right.
okay.
Wow, here I am, what happened? I went home, I was engaged to a girl, and I then suddenly, I just got anxious. Well, it wasn't the girl. No, as a matter of fact, I was more upset when she married a preacher. But anyhow, I got this anxiety. I didn't want to talk to anybody much about it because it was supposed to be something, no sissy and that sort of thing. And so I disbanded my getting married idea. I got with my parents. I was still single. With my minister and with my physician, and they all said I had to go get a psychiatrist or get the Army to do something. I didn't want the Army to do it. I didn't want this on my record. And it isn't. But you can put it there if you want to. Anyhow, I went to a psychiatrist. But first I went to other doctors, and they all recommended I see this psychiatrist in Oklahoma City, which I did with one of my parents. And they recommended that I take 3 electric shocks. And I did. Well, it seemed to help. I went back to college and graduated. And I saw the gal I'd like to marry then. I told her all about the past. She said, well, I'll take a chance.
Okay.
I got married. I was there for 58 years. But about every 10 years in this time, I've had a problem that would call me up nervous until Zoloft came. Zoloft made me a happy man. But first, though, I went under the care of my wife, who was very understanding. She stayed with me whatever I did. I got a master's degree. I worked heavily in engineering and had a successful life. 4 fine kids, and 2 of them right
it's devastating, it really is.
You think it's more now than that?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know, I'm not going, yeah. But anyway, that's, it's real, it's for sure real, and, yeah.
Hey,
Were there other comments on that? Yeah, Bob?
do you remember last year, I guess it was last year in Pittsburgh, and Todd DiCastino did that, he spoke the year before on Bill Walton, and then last year he did a,
Yeah.
gathering of the veterans, and, he came up with some kind of a topic to discuss with the veterans and get their feelings about it. But Mitch Cady got up during that discussion and started speaking on the idea of the men from the 87th Division coming back to the United States to, reassemble and,
Trying to go
and be
to Japan.
trained
Yeah.
to, for the invasion of Japan. And Mitch put the idea out there that there was a broad base of, disdain for the idea of these men going, after fighting fiercely in Europe, to come back here, reassemble, train, and go for an invasion in Europe. And a lot of men apparently were seriously considering
Well,
desertion.
I didn't read that in what he said.
What's that?
I didn't read that I thought he was asking for opinion, and he was saying that,
No.
that he sure had the feeling that he would have had a tough
Right,
time doing
but
it.
there were other men as well
Yeah,
that
I'm
were, just saying, like, I did my part, I did my share. I don't want any part of the.
So what's your point? Or
My
your
point
perspective?
is, they didn't. It sort of goes along with this idea that I've had enough,
Yeah.
right? And I don't want no more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, who knows? Yeah, that's a big imponderable, I would say. Other thoughts along those lines? That's good. Yes.
My best friend in my company was medic. In fact, he and I would dig foxholes together. And I felt safe if I had a medic close to me.
Close by, yeah.
If something happened.
All right.
But anyway, he got a letter from his family stating that something has happened, but we can't tell you what it is right now. We'll find out later. And about 3 or 4 days later, he got a letter that his brother had got killed. And every time we moved forward, after that, he'd drift back. He wouldn't stay up with us. And a company commander got onto him about it, and finally said, if you don't stay with us, we don't need you. So they sent him back, and on his way back, he got shot in the foot. We figured that he had self-inflicted his wound. Well, after the war was over, he lived in Asheville. I don't name him. But my wife and I went to visit with him. And when we got to the home, rang the doorbell. His wife came to the door. They asked for him. And he said, I don't know Jesse Walton.
Well, that's that feeling, I'm sure, I experienced with a fellow that was in Dan's County who was captured, became a POW. And I know that it took a long time. And we've even talked to people that finally came back to the division. That was a tough decision to not feel guilt for having been captured. But there was a fellow, Frank Harmon, in the outfit that had trained at McCain. He was captured in the SAR on the second day of combat. But anyway, we got to know him real well. Okay.
I would just say for it, the problem with the infantry is you're always pressing ahead and you get no breaks. All the other fighting units can rest for a while. And in the infantry, you're 2 hours on, 2 hours off, sleeping. And you really never get any rest during the time you're in combat. So if they could only change that, they give a rest sometimes with infantrymen, you may be able to fight further. But
Didn't didn't, I mean, at least the books say that, you know, you had 3 companies and there'd usually be no more than 2 online. I mean, not at all, but they tried to relieve, and when they could, change battalions would not, first battalion didn't always go in the attack, right?
Whenever you dug a foxhole.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
2 hours on, 2 hours off.
That was,
You never get any sleep.
yeah, sure. I follow you there today. About what did you, and I guess it depends on how much education you was, how informed, you know, whether you read a paper or not. How much did you know what was the big picture? How much did you know kind of what was going on, or, you know, or did it matter? Now, I know, as far as back, Mom in the scrapbooks have got maps, you know, where every day in our commercial appeals, the paper we got, there'd be a picture of where the front line was, you know, and the process along like that. Of course, that would be, what, at least 3 or 4 days delay, I would guess. Maybe not. But you could keep up with things that way. But he was saying that, I was curious if he knew about the Battle of the Bulge occurring. And he said, yes, indeed, that it was in the paper before they actually left New York. And so he knew it wasn't a cakewalk over there compared to what it was maybe looked like it was going to be after the invasion, Northern invasion was successful. And one thing that I've been curious about is those soldiers of you who are Jewish, were you aware what was going on as far as the Holocaust? Were you aware how brutal that was? And if so, how did you find out? Is that a question anyone would like to address? Flat.
There was never anything in the paper about the Jews being in the concentration camps. When the men came upon them, they were shocked. They couldn't believe what they saw. And that's when it hit the papers.
Okay. Any other?
I have a comment on Lucanville.
Let me just get a couple other comments here. Well, this little short fellow, by the way, down here is Val Brenner, in case anybody will.
As far as one of the questions about, did you know what was going on? I don't think we knew what was going on or cared. We just wanted to stay alive and protect each other. Hopefully that was, but we didn't know where we were for the most part, or where we were going, or what the purpose was. I don't think anybody knew that. And as I said, I don't think we cared. We just wanted to stay alive. As far as the second question is, at least and I don't think anybody knew about the concentration camps until we came upon them. At least I didn't. I hadn't seen anything like that. But we, our group liberated a small place called Ordorf. And when we saw that, we knew something about it. Before that, I didn't know anything about it. Nothing.
I was a little bit different about that, Jim. Yes. I was kind of a rover, and yeah, I was kind of a rover, and I found out, I know from battalion back what was going on, but I was always looking for maps, and I always go to artillery companies. I steal all the maps I could get my hands on, because they never really kept them. Okay. You could never really know where to get a map, and when they were coming up, if they were coming up, and so forth. So I go back as far as battalion and steal whatever I could, all the way back up into the line here, because I was what they call a surveying instrument there. I would deploy weapons for the company that needed heavy machine guns and mortars. So I was always roaming from company to company and so forth and so on. And I had many close adventures. I could never get away from being on the line because I had to stay there to make sure the weapons came up. And then we utilized the way they were supposed to be, because I'd come up to a rifle company and they needed so many machine guns. I'd call back on the radio, say, come on, bring them up. But I had to stay there until they came up. And I made sure that the section was deployed.
Big picture on it. Did you know?
Only from battalion to the line. I knew nothing beyond that. Well, one time I walked back a regiment, and I saw these fellows walking along with clean uniforms on, khaki, not khakis, but ties. And I said, is this the United States Army? This is it? This is the front line? This is part of the organization? Yeah, everybody, I would say,
This was a regiment, you saw these guys.
regiment. I got back as far as regiment. It was a whole new world for me. So that's what I would say. If you can read, go down and get a copy of the official World War II history. It's so revealing of what transpired, who fought where, and who did fight. Well, all I can say is it's so revealing, it's going to change your mind about the war.
Other comments along those lines? Anything there?
Well, I have one.
Okay, now don't take too long, Mr.
Well, I appreciate you correcting that. Just shortly, I wanted to point out that General Patton gave an issue for all of us, as many as could go, to go to Buchenwald. And I went in my Jeep with another officer and 2 enlisted men. That was the second day we got there and saw all the piled up people, the incendiary stuff, all that sort of thing. And then we were a Czechoslovakian who had been captured by the Germans, was in charge of the camp. Yeah. And he took us over to the headquarters where they had a jail in there, ourselves. And he wanted to show us some of the SS that they hadn't had a chance to get rid of yet. And he took us into each cell, and we thought he was going to interrogate them or something. Instead, he had them all get up, say Heil Hitler, and salute. And then he'd hit them with a crop, like whipping a horse. Yeah, and that shocked the heck out of us, even though we'd seen a lot of bad things. So I asked him, could you kind of quit hitting them there while we learn about them? And he says, hey, if you'd been to see the one I've seen, you'd be hitting them with both hands. And that was the end of the thing. I just wanted to say it was tragic, but I always thought Patton really did a wise thing. There must be others who went there that know something about it, but it was very sobering to me.
I remember last year there were a couple, and I'll not go any further on that, and some of you had both an opportunity, or what you might call it, to do that after when your combat was over, then before you came back to the States. A little bit of a change of direction. Jim Ogden, well, I want to get, I talked a little bit about the life of replacement, and that's I think, a significant, so many of you were. Jim talked about the loneliness of what it was like, and he was one, going into L346 in March, is that right, Jim? I think in March. And he described so pointedly the feeling that he had of the loneliness, and I've asked him to tell what it was like when he actually was down to that company and just that story.
Well, as I told the group several meetings back, I was an Air Corps replacement. That is, I got 6 weeks of infantry training and then went overseas as a replacement. And maybe it was a flux at the time, but we were always separated. We never seemed to stay together. And I found myself in the 17th Replacement Depot on a Friday afternoon, knowing only one person with whom I'd ever had any contact back in the States. And lo and behold, on Monday morning, when we were called out to go to various outfits, he went to one division, and I went
What's that?
I was truly alone, and I felt kind of devastated. And actually, until I came to Company L and finally began to be sort of acclimated to what was going on, I was really, truly on my own. And it was an experience that I will never forget.
And how were you received at the company? Did you
Well, that was-
take the idea of buddy to somebody?
I remember that 2 or 3 of the guys were very happy to see us because we still had backpacks and carried some extra clothes. So they were interested in our extra shirts and underwear. But as far as any close relationships to the fellows who were there, didn't seem to be too keenly interested in inviting us into their little cocoon.
Yeah.
And I learned subsequently that one of the reasons was simply that replacements came and went so fast that the old-timers didn't want to make any attachments because, they're just here today, gone tomorrow.
That's amplified in Lester Amwell's book too. There's a lot of occasions like that, difficulty. Well, unlike the reception he had, he has certainly loved his company and carried out extensive research on what happened to the men. And if you haven't looked at the outline of L Company in there, take a look sometime. Jim, we thank you for all that many hours of effort you put into that. Okay, now I want to open up for any questions or anything you might like to say. I want to let Harry tell the story about crossing the line, but I want to get a couple others. Harry talked to us a little bit last year. Sometimes Harry will talk a long time. But he's a good storyteller. He's a good storyteller. Anyone have any young people? Anything you'd like that Dad didn't talk much about, or whatever you'd like to know? Was it true?
Actually, it's a story that I heard, and I just wanted to see if any of you had this kind of similar experience. My dad had a class reunion in his house, and a guy named Buster Sullivan, who was not part of this division, but did fight in World War II, described an experience that he had, and it surprised me. He was in the northern part of France, and he had gotten hit by a bullet, I think, in the upper part of the leg, and he'd fallen down in a position where, because of his wound, he was unable to get up. He thought, well, this is probably it. It's probably the end of my life. And he heard rustling, and he heard people coming. He says, oh, thank God. It turned out it was 2 German soldiers, and he said, oh, this is definitely the end of my life. And the 2 German soldiers looked at him. They brought his leg back over, made it more comfortable. They patched up his wound, and they sat with him until the Americans came. And the Americans were, getting ready to fire. And these guys, and they said no. He says, they treated me well. He said they didn't want to fight any more than we did. And I was wondering if anybody else had any experiences with the Germans in that regard.
My father was came under artillery attack and was not hurt. He was not completely unconscious, but there was not a scratch on him. And his outfit had moved away. He was, separated from his, the rest of his his unit, and he came upon a house, farmhouse, and he heard some noises in there, and he went into the house. It was getting near evening, and he went into the house, and there were wounded American soldiers, there were wounded German soldiers, people, crying, people crying for their mothers. The Germans were speaking German, so I don't know what, but anyway, they coexisted together. Nobody was, no aggressive behavior. Everybody just spent the night there. And then, my dad moved on the next day. But they spent the night together in this farmhouse, yes.
Similar, I guess.
I said something?
Oh, you should have.
You're talking about the Germans and Americans. The Battle of the Bulge, who captured a German soldier with a white chief. And he was laying on the floor in the CP. Everybody that went into the CP gave him a rap. Hit him under. He was an enemy.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about. That time, they were our enemy. And I wanted to tell you, there's nowhere between. That's it. Dead or alive. That's the end of the story. But everyone that went in there, every American soldier, slammed him, hit him, spit at him. That's possible.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah.
Yes?
There's a guy. Did anybody see on the History Channel the Surviving D-Day? It was a program. It was a guy from New York. He had heard about the Holocaust. So he said, I put on, and he shot a picture of his jacket. He had a big Jewish star on there. The Bronx, New York. He said, I wanted them to know who they were dealing with. I love that story. And he did survive D-Day.
Yeah.
He saw his best friend killed. He was behind one of those things that goes like this.
Yeah.
And he had his cheek shot off. He was running towards me, felt something else. He heard the bullet. Here it went into the magazine of his rifle. He said, other people thought, terrible things happen to them, and they think, why me? He said, when I got to on the beach, he said, I thought, why me, Lord? Why did you save me? But I thought that was an interesting story. I wanted to know.
They would want to know what it feels. Okay. We did not, the original plans, of course, yesterday were to have the presentation on the Veterans Benefit in the morning, and then we were going in the afternoon for the other. So we did a little switching there, and we filled some time and we knew exactly what was going on. So we didn't get to spend as much time about talking with you about various actions that occurred during the Battle of the Bulge or after. Harry's got an experience about crossing the Rhine. Before I let him tell it, though, I want to ask, does anybody have an interesting story about that process? I know you crossed the Mosel relatively easy, but when you got to the bigger river, that was a little bit more of an obstacle. Mel's talked a lot. Anyone? I don't want to that. Anybody? Again, I want to get as many of you involved as we can on this. Okay, just a minute.
Well, it's about the open wall.
We want to move on to the Rhine. I remember you told us last year. That's why I said you talked about it last year. That you were one of the ones that made that visit. Didn't you?
Across the Moselle was a road parallel with the river. And beside the road was a rock wall. And somebody inscribed on the rock wall, seeking peace, finding death. But when we crossed the Rhine, was on the shore.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I know it was different depending on what regiment you were with and other things. That's, it surely wasn't, yes.
Two just quick things
Yes.
I recall about crossing the Rhine. The 345th crossed, I think most of us did, right at the little town of Beauport, which
Yeah.
I've been back to. Beauport is right at a very sharp bend in the Rhine. And two things that I recall. One, because the Rhine was much faster flowing water than, and in the time we crossed, it was already some of the spring thaw. We brought a lot of water down, and a lot of our boats crossing, we were paddling across, got swept down, and really almost wound up trying to land on the wrong side of the river because of that sharp end. The other thing is, and I frankly, so much is a blur, but I recall that across the river, the engineers in their wisdom had tried to put down a smoke screen to hide us crossing. The problem was that the Germans could see us coming out of the smoke long before we could see them from the smoke. And it really worked against us.
Well, that's real effective, too.
Yeah, when I went up across with the Bull Park, like the Bull Park, we paddled across. Well, I didn't paddle. They let me stay up front. We come out of that fall, and there was a comp on the other side. And man, there was still just open on, it was nice big hillside there. There was a mountain there. And there was a tugboat in the middle of the stream. And the pilot house was up there, you could see it, and everybody was at least paddling. We was going every which way, because everybody was looking at that pilot house that's all stuck out. We thought maybe maybe a sniper out there, but there never was. And then we landed and,
Moved on.
moved on.
What was the comment? That's all right. I'm trying to push it down. Okay. Yes, sir.
As Tom said, most of the troops crossed at Ron's and Bray, and the engineers took them across in boats. But an interesting story, a couple of years ago, I got a telephone call from Boca Raton, Florida. He gave his name, Estes, I think it was. He says, were you in the 87th? I said, yes. He said, did you cross the Rhine River? I said, yeah. He said, where? I said, around Beauport. He said, oh, yeah, how did you cross? I said, well, I crossed in these LCVPs, like they use in Normandy. And he said, those were my boats. This was a lieutenant in the Navy. He was at Normandy. He lost the boat at Normandy. But when it came time to cross the Rhine River, General Eisenhower sent these flatbeds full of these LCVPs. It took them 10 hours to get across France, and they came up to the river. And while you guys may have been crossing in the afternoon in the engineers' boats, I was stuck in a house along the river. And come midnight, we were told to come out, and we walked down the river until we came to this town, could have been Beauport, where we get on the LCVPs. I thought we were going to be the first ones over. Already there were some guys over there in those little boats. So when I get on that boat, I unbuckled my boots and undid the laces. I said, if we get in, I'm going overboard. Because I was a good swimmer, I had passed the life-saving test, and I said, I'm going to get the heck out of this boat. But anyway, this lieutenant was very happy to, he said, you were the first one I talked to who I took across, he took across the Rhine River. He said, we took 5,000 troops over. After we took the 87th over, we went upstream and we took the 89th Division over. Now, they didn't have any opposition like we did going across the river. But he calls me up every now and then. He likes to talk about what he did. And so he took all these troops across. We're very happy.
Yes.
When we crossed the Rhine, we were in one of the engineers were in charge and so forth. I can't remember how many were in the boat, but I don't think it's ever been on a boat before in their lives. We got about 50 feet from shore on the other side where we were going, and we got stranded on a sandbar. And so I just jumped over and went ashore. It was a good swim, and I'm a good swimmer. And I'll tell you, Rhine is not very warm in March.
Okay, let's move on farther to the east. What in kind of a postscript in Atwell's book, he interviews, or some of the men from the company come back to his apartment in New York after the war is over, and they're talking about things that happened. And I mean, I don't think he made this up. Apparently something happened in the second, somebody in the 2nd Battalion of the 345th was there. I think that, I think I've heard of this before, that they were coming out, maybe some young, what do you call the young troopers that were?
Hitler Youth.
The Hitler Youth, yeah. There were maybe I don't know whether it was a college they were trained, but anyway, these kids were, or at least men, whatever, were shooting people and they were up the mock flag, I don't know. But anyway, it turns around, once this was over, maybe a couple of Americans were killed. These folks were not taken prisoners, they were killed there. And that there's a whole sequence of how this kind of thing happened. The only thing I can recall Daddy talking about was remembering, and again, I don't know whether he saw this or whether he had heard that it happened. I don't know if it's related to this, that he had heard or remembered that one time after some of our guys were killed by fire, and then the people tried to surrender, that those, instead of being taken prisoners, that they were shot. So, kind of along with, does anybody, I know Mel, I'm going to let you tell this story, because was anybody from the 2nd Battalion of 345th that either heard rumors or anything about that? That's willing to tell. This is something I know Mel's told me before that's interesting.
What happened was that these kids would chop down the trees and put them across the road, and then they would hide at both ends of the tree, and so that we couldn't get by. And they wouldn't surrender. Even though they were in an impossible position, I guess they were so imbued with Nazism that they were going to die for it. And they would not surrender, and they had to be killed. And we had no choice. And that's what happened. They chopped the trees down, and they were across the road. And they had to get rid of the trees. In order to get rid of the trees, you had to get rid of the kids. And they just would not surrender until they had to be killed. Oh, they were 12, 14 years old, maybe something like that. Part of the Hitler Youth movement. And it was terrible. It was an awful thing to do, but there was no choice.
Well, you also told me about one of your men that you kept somebody from shooting a prisoner. What was that? Tell that story.
Well, I don't know how it was passed with everybody else, but I was adamantly opposed to killing prisoners. And I thought it was wrong to do. I thought it was murder. And I also thought that if the word got out that the 87th Division was killing prisoners, the Germans would not surrender, and that would be worse for us. But at one time, Roland Gilman and I were outside a building, and there was a sniper in the building shooting at both of us. Gilman was my very best friend at the time, and there was a small anti-tank gun, so Gil and I turned it around and started a fire into the building. The guy surrendered and came out with his hands up. I was so angry at him because he was shooting at me. He wasn't, arbitrarily firing. I was so angry. I was carrying a machine pistol at the time. I opened up the machine pistol, and I really wanted to kill him. And I had that machine pistol in his stomach, and I just could not do it. And I'm glad I didn't do it, because that's murder, and that's wrong, even though I hated that son of a bitch. But I'm glad I didn't do it. I really am.
What about plowing? You remember seeing the devastation there when you came in? Anything related that is of significance?
After we got back home, back in the States, and I was transferred up to Fort Dix, and they found out that I could type it, so I stayed there for quite a while. But it didn't bother me. I love the city. But we...
About plowing, about the devastation?
Yeah. I went to, I think it was 970 Park Avenue, where you get tickets for entertainment, that sort of stuff. And there were two of us, and we got tickets to go, and it turned out it was a rotary J.C. Penney sitting on my left, and I had this other guy right who had an accent. But he could speak English, but it was difficult. But he was an industrialist in Germany. And he said, well, geez, did you ever hear of a place called Plowman? I said, yeah. And he said, well, how's it look? And I said, well, not too good. And I just thought to run into somebody like that.
Yes. But he was originally from there. Other comments? Let me, any pressing, relatively short story that anyone would like to tell? I'm going to kind of do a wrap up a little bit earlier.
Well, it was kind of a comical thing.
Well, is it short, Victor?
Yes, it's short.
Okay.
I was where the building, we went in this town, and the houses was all blown apart, and I seen a small phonograph there.
Yeah.
And so it was just one turntable, so I kind of took it apart and had some training. Anyway, make sure it wasn't booby trapped. And there was some 78 records there. And so I put this record on, and I wound this thing up and put it down on there, and it sang a song. It was a Woody Woodpecker song sung in German. Inside my field jacket, and the first time I hit the ground, I didn't.
You're going to bring that one home. Wash my truck. Yeah.
You could smell it, the people, because everybody was living in the basements. They hadn't.
Yeah, he mentions that. Atwell talks about that in the book.
Yeah.
There was a smell.
That's true.
Let me, I'm going to wrap up here unless you younger people that you dare to ask. Yes, sir.
I'd like to know if anybody saw General Kessler, the German general, on the other side of the Rhine River, on the German side of the Rhine River, overlooking our lines. At March 25th at Borbach, Germany. I'd like to know if anybody saw that German general. Because he was on my gun side, and he was a mist. He came from all the way up on the road, and slowly, it was like a dot. And all of a sudden, 200 yards away on the other side of it, I'm looking up on my machine gun, could have knocked him off. He got out of his staff car. The staff officer opened the door and gave him a pair of binoculars, and he overlooked our lines. Now I want to know if anybody here, any combat soldier here, saw that, because it was on the line. There are plenty of soldiers there. Who else saw it? Was it me that I'm dreaming about it? Let me know.
Yes, dear. What's it? This time. Well, up here. It's past. Okay. Let me. This won't necessarily be called to your attention, but I think you've probably already noticed it. When I look back, I think back at the division reunions that I used to attend, going back to that first one in 80, whatever it was. One of the real interesting things among the organizers and the people was what company would have the most representatives there. It was a friendly competition, and they would always be recognized. And some companies would have as many as 10, and maybe more. And there were like I companies were kind of famous. I know I company, the 345th, with Mac McAleer would always get a lot of people together. And then 347 was Ray Miles' company, was it not?
Right.
They always had a big bunch, and others. But looking at a roster, there are only one or two companies that there are two or more of you here. And I think about two is maybe the max. K of 345th has got a few. And B, of course, Bob Purple's
We got 3.
group gets 3. And that's probably about the max. So it's important for us to keep some continuity in things, but we've got to start looking, as you probably are doing, at at least what battalion you were with, and kind of hunker up a little bit more and be looking for somebody that was in your battalion, and even regimental. I mean, I know you always will have regimental pride in the odds of the even, and but a lot of you don't know much anymore. So, and particularly if you see some guy that came or that's new or something and it's kind of off by himself, be sure to pull them in and interview them, kind of like I've done some of you guys, and get to know them and be sure to make them feel welcome and don't tell them everything you did, but find out a little bit what they did too. Okay. So that's what we'll look forward to next year. Again, I've enjoyed coordinating our forums. Apologize a little bit for not being a little bit more organized with some slides and stuff for today, but it is what it is. And I appreciate some honesty and some things that you shared with us today. And keep that up. So it's banquet time. I even brought a tie this year, so I'm going to go put that on, and we'll see you downstairs. Okay.